for Sheldon, right?
Yeah, I'm waiting for Sheldon.
Yeah.
Just give me one.
Yeah.
He's right. He was right outside.
Sheldon, she.
It's hard when it's your own business and you're like, oh,
You guys are totally working right now?
probably. He was just eating his lunch, so it's just like a Milky Way.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, that sounds like me, but slightly different. Mine's like a berry smoothie. After my midday workout, I'm like, okay, I'll eat a smoothie today, and then I'll be fine. Sheldon. Hey.
Basically, when I walk out that door, he's like,
Hello. Hey everyone, how's it going? Are we excited to be here? All right, me asking you these questions is also kind of doing a sound check. So, warming up the mic, warming up the pipes to introduce this fabulous panel and moderator. I'm going to introduce myself first. Good afternoon, by the way. I'm Timur Tugberk. I'm the founder and chief Imagineer at Designing the District. We are a full services creative consultancy and media agency. We take a design philosophy to creative problem solving. We're experts in brand and interior design, event and experience production, and digital, social, and brand marketing and management. I also have notes in case I forget something, guys, so please bear with me. We are passionate about brand culture and its growth. We step into spaces to grow the concept and bring the vision to reality. And I'm super proud to be here today. I'm also most proud as I was recently nominated as Best Local Influencer by Reader's Choice. Thank you. For Washington Blade Best of Gay DC Award. So please follow along our social media journeys at Timur DC and Designing the District. Also, I would like to add that I am one of the WeDC ambassadors for this year and excited for you all to join us today at the WeDC Futures Forum for our track, Future of Culture. Our next and final panel today is Bottom Line Results, Building an Inclusive Culture in the Workplace. I mean, I run my own business, you guys. This is extremely important, so I'm so stoked to see so many people here. Creating and maintaining an inclusive culture allows for a diverse and talented workforce to engage in a variety of ways to support strong values, growth, and ideation. The foundation of any successful business is creating an environment that encourages the acceptance and development of perspectives and views that allows employees to feel appreciated and comfortable sharing their true, authentic self. Amen to that. Today we will find out how to build an inclusive culture and learn how to go beyond company policies to enhance your business and support your bottom line. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Theresa Sheils, co-managing director from Gensler, DC. Thank you.
I think we're good.
thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to introduce the panel a little bit, and they're going to introduce themselves a little bit more. So our first panelist is Sheldon Scott, who you may have seen running around all day because he actually is the culture director for Eaton, as well as an artist. So welcome, Sheldon. And our next panelist is Rebecca Lee Funk, and I told her that she is my neighbor because she actually is the CEO of Outrage, who I'm sure many of you have been to over on 14th Street. And she started the business with this idea about radical inclusiveness, and then it really rotated into this whole idea of activism. So welcome, Rebecca. And then our last panelist is Johnny Bailey, who has a much longer bio, and he'll probably share it with you too. But he's the executive director of Shine Hard Family, and their goals are really to provide role models and mentors for visibly for industries and also for closing racial gaps around wealth. So welcome, Johnny Bailey. So Sheldon, do you want to just start with a little more detail for you?
Yeah. I am the director of culture here at Eaton DC. And to give a little context about the space that we're in right now, Eaton DC is a radical hospitality brand focused on creating spaces for progressive social change makers. And I came to this position from a full-time art practice that I still run now as an artist whose work is based in the ephemeral practice of performance, but I also create sculpture, photography, installation, drawings, video, and objects. And like prior to that, I came from a space of operating food and beverage outlets. But my first professional career was as a psychotherapist working in a dual diagnosis program focused on mental health and substance abuse, and then finished doing sex offender work as well too. So I've spanned many careers and many experiences that I all bring to my current practice today. So very excited to have this conversation about inclusive culture in the workspace.
Rebecca?
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Lee Funk, and I'm the founder of the Outrage. And the Outrage is a hub for activism, and our mission is pretty simple. We want to start and sustain conversations and actions around the causes that our community cares about. And we do that in two key ways, through both fashion and community. So on the fashion side of things, we donate to progressive organizations with every purchase, and we also get folks registered to vote in our spaces and also teach them how to contact their reps for the very first time. And then on the community side of things, we have been the official partner of every major progressive movement since the 2016 election. So think Women's March, March for Our Lives, Families Belong Together, March for Science, you name it, we were at the table helping to plan, on the day marching in the streets, sometimes in jail the next day, and then most importantly, taking it back into our community space where we could continue with that energy and that action.
John?
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Johnny Bailey. I am a social entrepreneur, the executive director of the Shine Hard Family, where our mission is to close the racial wealth gap. We do that through creating role model visibility for people of color in different industries. We also use their stories to kind of advance culture, break down barriers, and create a roadmap for the next generation. And aside from that, I'm also the digital coach for Google here in DC, where our mission is to level the playing field for minority small business owners. So we have a number of programs that are pretty much democratizing information access to Google Spaces, to Google products, so that minority business owners can, one, grow their businesses through digital skills, and also use those skills to secure jobs within tech and other industries that are underrepresented. So that's pretty much my background. Also, I'm a Hampton University graduate, so I went to an HBCU, but in high school, I was greatly the minority, where I was at a predominantly white high school. So I've had a lot of different experiences in different spaces as well. So yeah.
Great.
That's it.
Okay, so I think what we're going to try and do is, we've got about an hour, and I've got a timekeeper over here, so I'm going to keep my eye on him. But we also want to leave some time for questions from the audience, but we're going to kick it off. So I was interested to be a part of this panel because it was about diversity and inclusion, and I look at this panel and I'm thinking, one of the questions I asked was, is it actually going to be diverse? Because I think diversity and inclusion is something that's hugely talked about a lot right now. And sometimes I see a panel and I'm like, not all that diverse, but okay. So I guess I want to start with the first question. And what do you see as sort of the definition of, or the differences between diversity and the word inclusion? Johnny, you're ready to go.
Yeah. I love that question. And to me, I love the quote that says, diversity is inviting us to the party. Inclusion is asking us to dance. And I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, it's just creating spaces for minorities to thrive and succeed. Diversity is what you have, and inclusion is what you do. It's more of an action around it. So it's just creating programs and taking real initiatives to get other communities involved in projects and initiatives at your company.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think I'd add, in the context of like when I attend these forums and they talk about diversity, so often I see a CEO who's more often not a white male being like, well, I'm proud to report that my 63.5% women on my board and 42.8% are people of color. And so I think that this idea of diversity is oftentimes reported as like a metric or a quota or some kind of HR-driven thing, and we've realized that that's not sufficient, and I'm happy to see the conversation turn to inclusion, which I see more of a process.
Yeah, I think it's kind of that experience that we've had with like the changing of words over time and the meanings and how we frame we want to do things. Because there was the question around equality, and then like understanding that it's not equality, it's actually equity is the word that you want to use. Bringing a little bit more of that action to it, not so passive. One of the things around the word diversity I've come to find out is like it became very performative very quickly. Like people started performing diversity, and then it quickly kind of spiraled into tokenism. And we didn't necessarily have that language. So now as we're evolving, like we're getting to understand that inclusion, where the actual access to power and the point of view in which you set out your corporation or your business or your mission is actually driven by people who come from many different experiences, not just race, not just sexuality, not gender, like all these other things that include like real quote unquote inclusion, which is, like for instance, like as an artist, being a part of, what is a traditional corporate environment, and not in a way that's ornamental, but actually there's power involved. And, what you do with that power coming into with a completely different perspective. That's inclusion.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to jump on that comment that you just made, because it's something that you brought up when we had a pre-call, guys. Something that you brought up the other day on our pre-call, and it was this idea of diversity versus tokenism. And I found that interesting, so I'd love if you could expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like tokenism is it's the low-hanging fruit. It's very accessible for companies. And again, like, there's not that language around it. They wrap it in, or they couch it in something else. But,
metrics.
Yes, because like anytime you have people like start talking about numbers versus talking about people, it becomes, that slippery slope to like a very problematic place. Exactly. Like talking about the actual people there and not talking about them in that very reductive number, that statistic that we all realize can be easily manipulated and weaponized. So, like getting away from this tokenism and like, now having a space where that language is present and people can use that, and then hopefully with that, they can start to detect it, and people can then be empowered to talk about tokenism versus like real inclusion.
Great. I don't know if either of you guys have thoughts.
Well,
or
I love that Sheldon automatically on our call and both here today brings in, like, you can't have a conversation around these issues with talking about power. And I think in my, there's like two key things when I think about my experience with the Outrage. One, it's not a democracy, right? It's a workplace. So people reported to me, and in turn, people reported to them. There's a hierarchy, and that hierarchy automatically leads up to me. Well, who am I? I am a cis white woman. I'm married to a cis white man. I have no disabilities. I grew up in central Pennsylvania in a town that's called Happy Valley. So like, clearly, I'm gonna have some blind spots, right? And so I think the first thing is to acknowledge that, to acknowledge it every day, to carve space, to listen to other people on my staff that have different experiences, and then also taking the power and making sure that we distribute it across the Outrage, so that everything, yes, that people are going to lead up to me in terms of a reporting structure, but that doesn't mean that the power all leads up to me as well. So being intentional about setting up different verticals where people have ownership, and that's very easy to say, but it's hard to do. And I think we're very intentional about doing it, that if somebody owns something at the Outrage, they are the expert. And even if I disagree, I have to let them make that call. Otherwise, we're going to be reflecting a singular point of view that is, in many cases, probably disadvantageous to establishing an inclusive workplace.
You, Sheldon, and you, Rebecca, both have talked about power, right? And one of the things we talked about on the call the other day, and and you were just mentioning, where your point of view is coming from. And one of the comments from the other day was, what does the platform around diversity mean when it's coming from a predominantly white narrative? And so I don't know, Johnny, if you have thoughts on that, because this, it kind of goes to your comment of where you're coming from your point of view into the perspective of diversity, which I thought was interesting.
Well, with Shine Hard, we attack diversity through a lens of visibility, because I feel like the way that you make change is by creating representation in spaces that are underrepresented. So what we do is highlight and recognize Black leaders across industries to, one, show younger or other minorities that, one, if I see a Black judge, or if I see a female software developer, that I know that it's possible for me. But then also to flip that around, that companies can also see that there are successful minorities that are actually outperforming their white male counterparts, to know that these people are actually legitimately credible for this job. They are qualified and they can do the work. And so we try to present that, and that's how we really attack diversity. I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question, but I feel like
It's everybody's point of view, so yes, it does.
Underrepresentation is, like, to me, the underlying factor for a lot of the problems that we see in diversity, so that's where we attack it.
I don't know, Sheldon, you're the one who brought it up on the call the other day a little bit in that. I don't know if you have more thoughts on that, or talking about the point of view different people are coming from when you talk about that and how it works and how it gets integrated.
Well, I think that what we're seeing now, what we have seen, is kind of with this turn and this attention to the big word diversity. Like, it's easier for people to give access to space than it is to actually give away power. And there's also this kind of new kind of incentivizing for giving access to space. Like, Nike can put up a picture of, like, Kaepernick and make $17 billion, but what they've done is essentially, like, given access to a space that they know they ultimately control, and they can certainly, like, be fine with giving away that space until that space then becomes valuable in a way that they want to take it back. Mm-hmm. It's very much, you see it, it's the United States. Yeah. We don't mind that at all. So the idea is, like, really, how do we start to crack that access to power? Because then if you do create that access to power, then you don't have to worry about people being given space. Mm-hmm. The space is already theirs, right? The platform is theirs, and, they're able to access it in a way that's meaningful. And I think that's the thing that kind of should be guiding the decision, is, like, how much power are we actually giving to these marginalized voices so they can access their own agency, versus, like, how much agency can we allow them to have access to.
That's enough.
And I think that's also why
right?
we see minorities are the fastest growing entrepreneurial population in the country right now, because we're trying to seize that power. Mm-hmm. If we're not going to get a seat at the table in the corporate company, then we'll create our own table. Mm-hmm. And right now, I want to give a shout out to women, because right now you guys are the fastest growing demographic and entrepreneurs right now. So give a round of applause to the women entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And second to that is the Black and brown community that are starting businesses. And what Google has found is that this population is the fastest growing, 7% year over year, where the white male counterpart are actually decreasing 2% year over year. But the problem is that a lot of these communities don't know how to use the technical resources that are available, that are free, or they just don't have access to them. So again, it's about access, and it's really about us creating our own tables. I think that is probably the best route at this point.
Yeah. So I'm going to pivot a little to the workplace, right? So, and I'm going to use a statistic. It basically that diverse companies produce 20% more revenue. So with a statistic like that, why do you think it's so difficult for some organizations today to be more diverse and to be more inclusive? When you can look at it profitably and say, why wouldn't we? I mean, if you want to take away anything else other than revenue, right?
Well, because a common question at interviews is, are they a good fit for the culture? And if the culture has always been white males, then no one else is a good fit for the culture, right? So it doesn't.
This guy barely graduated high school, but
it's kind of hard. Yeah. So I mean, despite the revenue challenges, people just want to work with people that they like and they know and they understand and they trust, per se, or they want to have a beer with. So breaking down that barrier, it seems easy, but just really attacking, like, the micro behaviors is where we have to go, and it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
So on that, this is a measurement, right? 20% more revenue. And how do you guys think that you actually measure the success and impact if we're not talking about 20% more revenue, right? Is it about people? Is it about product? Is it about work? Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. My former career, I worked as an economist for years, where, like, your whole thing is trying to attach, like, causality to data. And this is the hardest question in the world. And I can't believe, as a former economist, I would say that I somewhat rely on anecdotal evidence. By that I mean, so at the Outrage, we intentionally set up and tried to carve out space to talk about these issues and provided a variety of avenues to make sure we were capturing our introverts and our extroverts and all of those types of things. So if you have a concern, or you think we have a blind spot, or you think we're doing something well, or you want to provide feedback at all at the Outrage, there's two main avenues. We have an anonymous platform that you can send in feedback online, and then we have all hands meetings where it's not just our full-time staff, it's anybody. And if you work 2 hours at the Outrage 1 weekend a month, you're invited to that all hands. And that is one anecdotal metric of success that I have, in that people have rarely, I think maybe twice in the company, written into the anonymous platform. And our all hands meetings are spicy. And they are raw and real and authentic, and I'm very proud of that. And people that aren't there every single day still feel heard, and that there's enough space for them to be their authentic selves, that they can share things that are often very, I think, difficult to express. And I think a lot of that just begins with listening. And these meetings, I don't speak, I don't present, I sit and listen. Of course, ask questions, or answer questions, but carving space to listen.
I think that's a huge foundation to progress, is just being able to have the tough conversations, and being able to sit through uncomfortable dialogue is a great starting point for diversity and inclusion conversations.
I do. I get nervous anytime you start to tie in like a financial value based on personal identities. Because like for that 20% that you are getting in increased returns, what have you invested in?
Right.
Who have you invested in? It's a question that we are constantly asking ourselves here at Eaton, which is particularly sensitive because we are focused on marginalized voices, but we are part of a capitalist structure. Yeah. And we always have to be mindful and clear, like, who are we investing in for these supposed returns that come in at this additional, there's a lot of interest and a lot of money being put towards like impact investing. Mm-hmm. It's like the new thing. And, a lot of these impact investors are now becoming what they call material. And that world, meaning like they are becoming the majority of the people, and are not just interested in what kind of return they get on their money, but the triple bottom line.
Right.
It's like, what else are we getting out this aside the 20%
how much more can we squeeze,
return?
right? Yeah.
Exactly. But thinking about it from a standpoint that talks about, not just profit, but like, people in place.
Exactly.
And those are very tough things to measure right now. The measurement structure for those types of things, like, they largely are anecdotal in nature. But there's not a structure to actually put value on that. And like say that, because we have these stories from these people that say that they feel this way, or are in this space right now, then that then in turn translates to some other value. So it gets, it gets very touchy and, slippery. Like we've all been, we know what happens when certain values and personality get attached to a financial, structure.
Right.
And, I think like, it's incumbent on us as we move forward to continue to push where that is not the exclusive measurement of like how we deal with communities. Because I'm not interested in all the fact that, companies like Nike make, another $7 billion based on this. Like, what do they ever do for social justice?
Right.
It's like, what have you invested that money in, either before or after you made it?
Right. Now that you've
we'll
gotten
take it anytime.
Right? Yeah.
To like ensure that you are honestly serving and being in service of this community that you are financially benefiting from.
Yeah. You both, I think, Rebecca, you and Sheldon both mentioned this idea of listening, and it's funny that you said about your meetings, because my partner and I just last month put together a Ask Theresa and Francisco Anything, and we put anonymous boxes with questions, and I was like, oh my God, what are we gonna get? And we just sat, we have an hour for it, and it ended up going an hour and a half, because we said, I don't care if there's a question, I don't care if somebody wrote, I don't like your shirt today, we're gonna erase each one and we're gonna answer them. And they ranged from, why did we have a layoff in this office across the country, to why don't we have more tampons in the women's room? And we answered every single one of them. And to your point, It has made a difference. It probably was more emails that I got from that hour and a half, and that to me is a measurable impact, right, around listening to your people than a lot of the other things that we sometimes do. And so around listening, and you mentioned introverts, Rebecca. We're living in a world where type A personalities are often seen as leaders and the successful folks. But how do we make space to allow for the cultural protocols that maybe culturally you're not going to be this huge extrovert in the business world, or you're just an introvert in general?
I think it's the way that we solicit information. I mean, there's so many built-in barriers to like people being able to deliver information. Like one of which is the traditional higher education structure. Like, thinking that people don't have a credible voice because they didn't go to a university. I mean, that's just a part of the history of creating barriers after barriers after barriers. Like understanding that there's validity in voice from every point, and like actually finding ways to actively access those voices and not passively expecting people to come to you to share with you their ideas. That's an investment in community. It's like, how do you go out and have a conversation with the community, like knocking on doors? Are you just going to sit back and wait for people to come and tell you things? And then when you don't find these things or you don't hear these things, you can easily say, I haven't heard that. I haven't seen that.
Or why didn't you come to me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Again, it's a structure, it's a barrier. And like there's so many things that you have to think about in those barriers, like, like transportation, like accessing the space. Something we think about a lot. Like, we're here at 12th and K, we're in the belly of the beast. Like, we are far, far, far away from communities that can benefit from our programming the most. How do we address that?
How do you have the outreach as opposed to the inreach,
and the impact,
right?
Absolutely.
And I think in terms of being an extrovert or an introvert, which I totally relate to because it's lovely, as you all seem, I'd rather not be here. Speaking
in front of you,
yeah, like I'd like to be in front of my computer
in the
working.
limelight.
Yeah, but we do activity with everyone that starts at the Outrage that's meant to be more personal and identify exactly those types of things. Where we just walk through and we're like, what are the 20 things in your life, and it can be when you're a 5-year-old and it was like a dance recital or something, that gave you the most joy when you did something and why. And collect that and then break it down to try to identify when people feel success, because it's not always that you've achieved something that you feel successful. And then from that, it's really helped us figure out where people are going to thrive, because we're a startup. Like whatever type of work makes you really excited, we have that. There's enough work to go around. So that's really helped us identify these kind of introvert versus extrovert of like, this person wants to be behind their computer in a data set. And that can really add value to the team, and also allows me to celebrate those types of folks who don't get the flashy work that's obviously marked by success.
Yeah, I would piggyback off of that by saying I also work in a startup culture as a social entrepreneur nonprofit space, and for us it's really important that we put our people in position to be their best selves. We try to find ways for my team to thrive. The majority of my team is volunteers, and we have a very small salary staff. So I really empower my team to get to know our team and to allow them to express their passion within our mission, and then give them the opportunity, keys to that car, so they can drive it and make change with that. I also believe there's 5 levels of leadership. I'm a huge fan of John Maxwell. And when it comes to the 5 levels, position is level 1. So just because you have a title does not necessarily mean that you're a great leader. And that's a concept that a lot of corporate structures have, where we assume that just because we have the CEO title or the VP title that we automatically know what's best for the company in terms of revenue or in terms of culture.
Or people, right?
Or people,
Yeah.
right. So I feel like we have to understand that investing in people is actually the 4th, and creating respect on what you've actually done for your organization are level 4 and 5. So focusing more on investing in the people and investing in the mission of your organization are better ways to lead. And just because you're an introvert doesn't mean that you cannot do great work and not invest in people.
That's great. Also, I'm like, hope somebody's taking notes, because I'm getting a lot of good ideas from you guys for our own organization. But what you guys have said rings true, because we had a guy in our office, and he was he was working out okay, he was fine, and he was in one studio and we moved him to another studio. And he said, do you mind if I sit in the corner, in the back corner? And they're like, no, if that's where you want to sit. He has totally thrived in that new studio because he put it out there that that's what he wanted and needed. And who'd think that, hanging out, well, maybe you would, Rebecca, but hanging out in the corner, you're
awesome.
like, yes, it sounds amazing. Could you turn the lights out? Would really make such a change in someone that you see almost in a month, right? So I'm going to pivot a little. We're in a time where there's 5 generations in the workplace, in the workforce. In such a multi-generational workplace, what do you see are the challenges, but more importantly, the opportunities?
Well, I'm very passionate about the millennial generation, me being one myself. Shout out to my millennials out there. I also consider myself an elder millennial because I'm old enough to remember before there was internet and I was using a big map. Well, my parents were in the car and we were just trying to figure out to get somewhere. Or we had the little GPSs that you had to buy externally and put them in your car. Or you had dial-up on AOL. You've got mail. I remember all of that stuff. In the workplace, I feel like millennials have great ideas and we understand technology more than anyone. So you have older generations, Generation X, baby boomers, who are maybe not as acceptive of the technology era because one, technology is taking jobs. It's automating jobs where people are losing jobs. And so people kind of see tech as the bad guy, where millennials embrace tech as a tool to change the world. And I think that we have to find the middle ground to say, okay, how can we educate the older generations on the tools that are available, which is why I'm so passionate about being a digital coach, is educating people on tools that are growing and innovating the world, but then also teaching millennials that we have to be patient, that we can't have everything right now, and that it takes consistency and dedication in your work and in your people in order to actually grow an organization or expand a movement. So I think it's a matter of balancing patience and then also continuing to learn as you grow. Like, you never stop learning. And I think older generations have to embrace that fact as well, because we're all going to have to, at some point, millennials are going to be the oldest generation, and then we're going to have to be learning the newest thing. So.
And you're going to say, remember those crazy old iPhones?
Right. Like, when all I did is just a text. Now I can just think it, and you guys get the message.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'd flag that for us, a lot of that work we do outside of technology, so much of this is cyclical, especially in the activist and movement space. So many of the people and most of our customers of older generations, they come in wearing shirts saying, I can't believe I'm still protesting this shit. They've been it before. They know how to build these movements. There's a lot that we can learn from it. And I'd also be honest about the fact that hiring people from older generations is right now a big pain point for the Outrage and something that we're not really fully succeeding at. And I think anytime that you don't see diversity in your workforce, you have to look about what your communities are and where you draw your talent pool for it. So in a lot of ways, our workforce looks extremely diverse because we have all these partners of extremely progressive movements, but we only have one person, if I'm totally honest, that's above the age of 50, and they work in Philadelphia. And so it's a major pain point for us, and it's just a signal to me that we're not present in all the communities that we need to be.
I think one of the things that we get the joy in this particular ecosystem is because there's so many people here and there's so many different types of jobs. Like, if you look at the entire ecosystem, you see a lot of diversity. Mm-hmm. But then if you boil down like the power structure, like, you'll see that it gets younger and younger over time. Yeah. And there's certainly a tremendous value on having people who have probably the most valuable kind of experience, and that's experience with human beings. And those are the people who have been here the longest and have the most to share. Again, it's like one of those things you have to be very active about because, finding, someone to fit within that structure of that age set, it's like, like we build jobs around millennials all the time. It's like, oh, we want to get this point of view because, and again, you're just thinking about people exclusively through like their buying power and their structure.
Right.
So
nobody cares about me. I'm Gen X. I'm the tiniest group out there.
Exactly. How much money are you spending, and how are you impacting, the culture right here, right now?
Yeah.
So it's that conversation, but I think the tremendous value of having people, who are a lot more seasoned to share some experience about like how businesses grow and maintain and sustain, just really hasn't been given that kind of same value and attention. And that's just something we just have to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of it that we think we're doing right, but we're not. There's a lot of things that we're getting wrong.
It's kind of like, I'll just focus over here.
Yep.
And you just keep working over there till you retire.
For sure.
And it's funny that you say that because I work with a guy in our office who's pretty much the guru of specifications in the entire firm. Of 6,500 people, he's the guy they call when there's a problem anywhere in the world. And he's 63, and I said, you are not allowed to retire until I retire because I don't want to be here if you're not here. And he goes, I'm at least 10 years older than you. I said, exactly. You are going to be working till you die because you have to stay here. Because no one has come up that is half as knowledgeable as he is around his topic. So one of you guys just mentioned this idea of, I think it was you, Sheldon, about longevity and experience around people. And so I think, having clear values and discipline to stay true to them is really, in a great organization and company is really important. So I would love to hear if you guys have examples that resonated you, where leaders have stood by their decisions, even if it was going to have a negative financial impact or a negative impact somewhere. But you were really impressed by the fact that they really stood by the values, which I think sometimes is a tough thing for some folks to do.
Well, it certainly happens here. Like, we've been in operation for just a year now, and I think that, we enjoyed about 5 years of development where everything was a concept and everything was easy. There were no pain points because there wasn't anything to, be painful about because it's all concept. It's all going to work perfectly.
Everything's a dream.
And then the door opened and the shit starts to fly. And you find yourselves at the intersection of, this big monstrosity known as like capitalist structure. Yeah. And like doing good. And I guess one of those examples was we had an art installation in here done by an artist, Mel Chin. It's called the Fundry Project, and it was all about leaded infrastructure in the United States and eradicating that.
Okay.
And it was a project he worked on for 12 years, and it was capstoning here at Eaton, DC, where we were bringing families from all across the country, Flint, North Carolina, Grand Rapids. They're all coming here to meet with their federal legislators to talk about creating legislation that would eradicate, leaded infrastructure in the United States. That project ran into so many, the 6 months of his ran into so many pain points where we had to make a decision to displace revenue in order to be able to accommodate like these 15 or 20 people that were coming in. And there was just one point where it just literally got down to almost fisticuffs in the office where people who were like, committed to, that financial bottom line, and then everybody else on the other side, like myself, was like, we have to make an impact, and this is what's important. And, when the rubber made the road, we had to escalate it and take it right up to Catherine Lowe, our founder and director, and say, like, what are you going to do? We are going to lose tens of thousands of dollars by making this decision for housing these families for this week while they're here meeting with Nancy Pelosi and those guys. And, without hesitation, she was like, this is what we're committed to doing. It's done.
Yeah.
And what that really did is that kind of set the tone for people who have been working in this industry for decades. Yeah. Getting them to understand the reality of this company, like understanding that there's a difference between a practice and a ploy, and that we were in full practice, and that means that we're committed to that. And, it's just like kind of one of those examples. And what it really did, it ended up realigning this company and its reality as to like what we do and how we get to those decisions. And it's like, it's very clear now like what we do and how we do it. Right. But it's a point that you have to work through, and it does have a real impact on the bottom line if we're looking at that singularly, but then like thinking about like how we're going to be creating a legacy in this world that's just by not beyond profits. It was clear that the decision just was non-negotiable.
That's interesting because that, it's so early on in the company, right?
Yep.
In the hotel that was the make or break point. And if you eroded everything you believed in that moment, it's just all talk, cheap talk, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a couple quick examples. One with a company that existed. So I'm sure everyone's probably heard of Tom's, the shoe company that kind of pioneered the one-for-one model. So you buy a pair of shoes, they donated a pair of shoes. Not particularly controversial. So their customer base was really, like in terms of the political landscape, spanned from left to right to center. And we partnered with them on a gun violence initiative early in the year that was they had collected postcards from all over the country, and they were coming to DC to then deliver them to representatives. And in talking with Blake, the CEO, and also their chief of staff, they were very realistic about the fact that this was the first time they were really dipping their toes into something that is a very controversial issue in the United States, and they were likely going to lose people that weren't just potential customers, but had been with them since the beginning of Tom's. And then even more impressively, like they wanted to align themselves with places like the Outrage, where we've always been unapologetically progressive, and that scares a lot of people away. And they did it anyway, and I think it was successful. And it also, their business suffered in some ways and benefited in others, but opened this avenue for them to continue to pursue this new path that was based really on a core set of beliefs. And then personally, for the Outrage, we deal with this shit all the time. So we're small, like we're still a small company and very small potatoes compared to these large corporations. And we were approached by Macy's last year to do pop-up shops in their 8 biggest locations throughout the country. So for that's huge, and it's amazing and really exciting. And we went through the whole process. We ordered all the merchandise, did all this these logistics, and I don't know what happened on the Macy's side, but about a week before we're supposed to launch, they look at the merchandise that we're gonna sell there. And they were like, yeah, we're cool with this stuff that says you're the woman, but like,
Not 2 women.
but not anything around like white supremacy is terrorism. And that was, it had to be a deal breaker for us. Like, where you can't like cherry pick the causes that aren't scary for you. And it sucked. And it set us back tens of thousands of dollars, which for a smaller business is, we don't have that just sitting around. But it's something that we absolutely had to do, and I at least get to share the story, and maybe someday it will pay off. But those decisions come up for us every single day, where people, some topics are like totally fine now, like feminism is just great, but other things we can't quite touch.
So my journey that's really funny that you guys had to step out of that, but my journey has been primarily entrepreneurial. So it hasn't always been working for this big company that says, okay, we have these core beliefs, but I have been very, very proud and impressed by Google's firmness in their belief that technology and information should be democratized. And I've seen them run multiple campaigns that are promoting privacy and transparency around the information that's shared on that platform. And then even so much to say that they're creating programs like, that's my daughter in the back, by the way.
I was going to say, this is a diverse crowd.
We have all generations in the building right now. She must hear my voice. Hey, baby. Creating programs like Grow with Google, where Google's identifying margins in different communities and trying to do something about it. And not every company, like Sheldon said, every big corporation is going to create something or invest back in communities that are helping them create billions and trillions of dollars. So I'm very proud of the Grow with Google program, and seeing them change lives and really create measurable outcomes in minority communities is something that has been impressive for me from a leadership perspective. And they remain true to that. And I applaud companies that create values that the employees can get behind. Because me as a black man, I didn't want to work in corporate America. I left corporate America. I actually worked for Nike for 4 years. I left that situation because I wanted to have the autonomy to create my own and work in something that I believed in. So working for a corporation again and having leaders who believe in something and stay true to that, it means everything to me as a minority professional. So that's my experience.
Great. Rebecca, one of the things you mentioned on our call the other day was, is there a difference with diversity and inclusion when it's woven into the fabric of a company versus when it's not necessarily mission driven?
Yes.
I know yes, but
Full
maybe
stop.
you could, and you touched on it a little earlier too, Sheldon.
Yeah, and I think Johnny also talked about it when your culture has always been created by and for white men, that's going to require a huge shift, whereas if you're building something from the ground up and it's interwoven into what you're doing and valued from the get-go, it's just an entirely different world. And so I've worked in places that were very siloed and had old institutions, and diversity was treated, it became tokenism, and it was this quota that HR was checking off. And I think I don't entirely know how you shift that. It sounds really hard, and I'm grateful to not be working there right now.
How do you guys think you change that though, right? Because, you know, you mentioned, Rebecca, recognizing that you don't have an older population in your organization and understanding that that's a problem, but there are probably people that and firms and organizations that, you know, just plow through their life and one day they look up and they're like, shit, we're kind of an inclusive mess, and they want to change. Do you think that's possible, and do you think it's possible to shift it in a way that's authentic? Johnny? Don't ask me to repeat the question because it was off the cuff.
Yeah, that was deep. I'm going to defer that one because I have to think on it.
I mean, I think you're thinking about like a structure, you're thinking about an environment that you're bringing, because it's going to be disruptive. The whole landscape is going to be disrupted by like this new push and this new kind of understanding. And I think, you know, one of the things certainly can relate to Rebecca on is like coming to a company where it's a part of the foundation, like where we started off with this. But like, I think about it like when you go to the pet shop and you buy a goldfish and they put it in a bag. And like before you put that goldfish into the tank that's in your house, you have to put the bag in the tank first. Otherwise you shock and you kill the fish.
It's like I was wondering where you were going.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
sorry.
got it.
That's all right. Don't forget I'm an artist. But it's like, you know, if you were to take the fish and just dump it directly into that tank, it shocks it and the fish dies. So you have to give that opportunity for that fish to happen. Because I think oftentimes when we think about these situations and putting people into these situations, we think about it from the perspective of the dominant white structure that exists already. Well, how are they going to feel with all these black people coming in the office or all these queer people coming to the office? No one ever thinks about it as like, how the hell am I going to feel as a black gay man going into this space filled with cisgender white women?
Right.
Men, whatever.
Whatever, right.
You know, it's a shock to my system as well, and there's never that accommodation.
Right.
And, you know, so you're already starting off on the wrong foot because you're keeping the center of focus on that dominant structure.
Yeah.
So it's like, so having to back that off, and again, you're talking about ceding power, because that means that you have to then relinquish some of that power to allow that person to come in there and to identify the landscape, quote unquote, set the temperature of the water that they're about to enter themselves. So maybe now you get hot.
Is it really
as
a shock?
We'll put you in the
as
bag.
A black man, is it really a shock walking into a company where it's all predominantly white? It's the culture. To me, it's
No,
not a
it
shock.
is. No, it's a shock.
I'm also expecting that.
It's a shock,
I
not
haven't
just
seen
because it's
different.
like what we expect. It's still a shock. And it's not fair to think that it is not disruptive to me to constantly be in that space.
You know, it's
not just
a
because it's
homogenous
expected,
space when
not
you
just
go into
because it's the
corporate.
normative, but the thing is that we can't continue to normalize that. And I'm not going to normalize that. That is a shock.
Okay.
It's a shock. No matter how true it is, no matter how consistent it is, no matter how historic it's been, it's a shock. And every day it's a shock and it's a trauma, and it needs to be addressed.
The trauma is there, but it's not a shock. I think it's more of a shock to see an excellent, overachieving minority who can outperform the white counterpart. I think that's the shock, and that's the activism that needs to be pushed. So
But I think you're thinking about you're thinking about it again from the dominant structure. It's a shock for me to walk into that space. Not to say it's not expected, not to say that it's not norm, But you can't continue to expect me to normalize this
Of course not.
and
You
say
don't
that that's
accept
okay
it.
and it's not a problem for
Right.
me. It is a problem. And it will
I agree with
always be
that.
a problem. And it always has to be posited
But we
that
have to
way.
accept that that is the norm in order for us to make a
I don't know if
change
we have to
on top
accept
of
that.
But
I
that
don't know
is
if
the
we have
norm.
to accept that.
That's the
I think
current
what we
state
I think what we
of
have
the
to say
conversation.
is that we know that that's a part of the historic landscape, but it's not okay to accept that. It's not okay because that's the first step in continuing normalization. That's the first step in making that system continually toxic for people.
But don't
And
we
that's
want that
not-
majority to accept that they are doing something that is causing shock and causing harm? Shouldn't there be some acceptance before there can be improvement in therapy
On
to
whose
grow?
part? Like, who are you asking to accept something? Because again, like, I'm not
Well,
going
we all
to
have
continue
to
to
accept- we
burden
all
the
have to
people who
acknowledge
already
the
carry the
current
burden.
state.
Like, we already have that burden with us. Before we even got into that room and before we actually saw that room,
Of
we
course.
have that burden already.
So
So,
that
I'm
is-
not going to
that's
ask
exactly what I'm
someone else to
saying.
continue to accept that burden. You know, you can't. You just can't. And I don't care like how you frame it, like as a part of the history, as part of the structure, we can't continue to ask people to continue to be burdened and accept that burden willingly
Not at
walking
all.
into a space. It is still a shock
Yeah.
every day.
To each his own. To me, I'm not shocked. To me, I go in, I expect that, but I also accept the responsibility that it's my responsibility to change that for my culture, for my generation, and the next generation.
I don't think that there's a difference there. I think the difference is like my level and experiencing with that, like I've evolved on that process and I refuse to continue to accept that this is not a shocking, that this is not a toxic system. I just won't.
I won't accept it either.
Actually, just listening to both of you, I think you're not that far off from one another. Of what the way you're talking. You're like
saying the
somebody's like,
same
I
thing.
think they're very far. I don't know.
No.
But we are ready for questions. I don't know if everybody's ready for questions, but we are ready for questions. I'm going to start in the front. You, sir.
Mine is not much of, thank you. Mine is not much a question as just a comment I would like to make. I totally, completely agree with what you said, and I believe that the most important thing that you mentioned is about power. Okay? Now, but I think that if we want to change the situation, we have to have all the sectors involved, the business, the community, and the government. How do we get to change that? We have to go back. What kind of education the black person is going to get? What kind of health care they're going to get? It's not just a matter of taking them, as you say, move them, throw them there. Now he's in the room. No, how good has he educated? How much health does he have? What has been eaten? What kind of quality of life does he have? So we can get in there and be able to do the job. I think that takes all sectors involved because by the time he gets there, it's too late to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting comment because, you know, we work a lot with organizations and one of them is NOMA. And NOMA, you know, if you look at, it's an organization of college graduate who are African American and black students. And you say there's only this many architects who are African American, this much percentage. And you're like, well, what are we going to do about it? Mind you, they've already graduated college. All these people are in the workforce. Well, you're not going to start tackling that issue at the workforce. You've got to tackle that issue regardless of what it is, like you're saying, in all levels. Like, how do you get people excited? How do you put opportunities of jobs and professions in front of people that maybe wouldn't have seen this as a challenge or as an opportunity for them? And you can maybe affect it, but you can't change it at such a late stage in the game, I don't think, completely.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is like structurally, like that stuff happens. I mean, that stuff happens way, like you said before.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about, the effects of redlining, which happened 60 years ago. Like when you're talking about like, how do you end up to that boardroom? It's not so direct, and it's not so immediate. Like you're talking about breaking down structures, like what I mentioned earlier, like barriers after barriers after barriers. Like, you're having children
Right.
coming to school who are hungry,
Right.
And thinking about like how that child will then eventually end up 20 or 30 years in a boardroom. So it goes that far back.
Right.
Much more
Exactly.
structural
Yeah.
than that.
I mean, we work with architecture in the schools in DC, and it's bringing this idea that you can build things and you can make things that, for kids that don't even think that that's an opportunity for them at all, right? We're going to take the next question. Ma'am.
Hi. I think one of the issues we have to address is that we all come with our own unconscious bias. And so that plays into every decision we make. Like, I'm Caribbean, I might be more likely to, be friends with somebody else who's not. So just recognizing our unconscious bias plays a big part in every decision we make. I think it's part of this beginning of addressing the problem.
Absolutely. I mean, we didn't talk about that today, but I think that's a huge thing, right? We've invested in bringing people into our firm to talk about unconscious bias, because you can't talk about all this other stuff if you can't address you as an individual or as an organization, or you or you or you or you. I think that's dead on.
And I think we dispel that by spending time around different types of people. That's probably one of the biggest challenges, because if you grew up in a higher socioeconomic community, you might have never been in school with another black person. Then you go to this Ivy League school where you're, again, not around any black people. Then you go to this corporate company, again, not around any black people. So it's easy for you to subscribe to things in the media that say black men are like this, or Latin people or Mexican people are like this. So you don't have the experiences. So now, if you didn't have that, okay, we accept that you didn't have that, but now we need to integrate and say, hey, now you have to sit at a room, at a table with these different people and have a conversation. Get to know them on a personal level, because you can have James, a white boy who grew up in the black community, who will be totally cool and understanding and not judgmental around other communities, and be a great leader for all people. So I think that whether it's at the beginning of the cycle of the system or at the end, it has to happen. We have to have a way to break down unconscious bias.
Sir.
How's it going? Thank you all for being here today. It's been very informative. Question I have is, I worked for DC Public Schools for 5.5 years, and there were two models that were passed around in terms of inclusion and diversity. The first one is race and equity training, which ideally identifies through affinity. Their model I thought was very broken, because their affinity was black and white. As a Mexican American, I don't identify as black or white. I identify as a person of color in some contexts, but it is something that it never felt like there was a space for me in that room. Not just me, it could be male, female, whatever they identify with. Now, they tried to move to a model which I thought was much more inclusive, more of a restorative justice that targeted more towards identity, whatever that was. So that felt very inclusive. Have there been things or ways that you've found other communities that don't look like you, who might still be people of color, to be able to help them bridge that conversation and be a part of that conversation, to be able to express their ideas or their perspective about something?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like a lot of the conversations that are happening in these diversity spaces are binary in nature, which is also a problem. Like, you have to break the binary and understand that all of these things live on a spectrum, and having some relationship and education, because the first thing is the language barrier. Like, a lot of people don't have the basic competency, much less fluency, when it comes to the discussion of gender, the discussion of race, the discussion of presenting one race as you all understand it, but then being a member of another ethnic minority. And, that's where most of the slip-ups happen, because they say things in front of you thinking that,
It's all good.
you probably have heard people make disparaging comments about things. And you're like, yeah, no, that's me.
Yeah.
So, it's about how people understand and how people interpret these very things, and those kinds of binaries and those kinds of biases happen at, right now scientists anticipate around 18 months. Right when children start to categorize and separate things, that the biases of their parents start to enter into their consciousness.
Yeah, I hate to break this to you. I'm sorry. We're out of time, but I've had a fun time. So thank you guys.
Awesome.